a very large number of people in the United States define themselves as spiritual but not religious. Spiritual but not religious. It's also called SBNR, which stands for spiritual but not religious. According to some surveys, more than half the American population define their faith as spiritual but not religious. So what is this? What is its relationship with Hinduism? Is it something that learned Hinduism and started calling it something else? We will discuss this today with a head of an organization that is a very explicit Hindu organization, but run by Westerners who converted to Hinduism, who understand what actual conversion is and why this spiritual but not religious middleman, mushy, undefined kind of a place is not acceptable. So I'm going to have an exciting conversation with the head of Himalayan Academy, which is which publishes the leading Hinduism magazine called Hinduism Today. It's based in Hawaii. And my real question is to find out, for your benefit, investigate more on the spiritual but not religious ambiguity that a lot of people are involved in. And a lot of Indians have picked up this identity because out of shame, out of inferiority complex, out of whatever misunderstandings about their own tradition. So the spiritual but not religious world, that group of people is the latest challenge Hindus should face. And today we're going to talk about it. It's a very exciting show. If you like what you see, make sure you donate, because to keep these going, we have a lot of cost structure. Please go to the infinityfoundation.com and click the donate button. Today my guest is a very special person, Swami Bodhinatha from the Himalayan Academy. He is the leader of this organization in Hawaii. It's a Shaivite organization, a very proud Hindu organization. They are very well known for the Hinduism Today magazine, which they publish, which is a very professional magazine circulated all around the world, probably the premier magazine on Hinduism for the past 15-20 years. I've known them for a long time. Welcome, Swamiji, to my show.
Thank you, Rajiv. Pleasure to be with you.
So, Swamiji, correct me, how long has Hinduism Today magazine been around?
Hinduism Today magazine has been around since 1979.
Wow. I mean, I've known it for 15-20 years. Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah. And how big is the circulation roughly?
Well, it's hard to judge the readership, but we print up to 15,000 copies, and we have about twice that viewed on different digital forms, the web, digital apps, digital downloads.
Yeah.
So it's read in many different ways.
Excellent. I'm so happy. Swamiji, for the benefit of some viewers who might not be familiar, can you tell us a little bit of the background of your organization in Hawaii, how it started, and what its range of activities are?
Yes, well, our organization was started in San Francisco in 1957 by my guru Savaya Subramanya Swami, who was the head of it until his Mahasamadhi in the year 2001 when I took over. And then we moved from San Francisco to Hawaii in 1970, established a monastery here, which today occupies some 382 acres and has 20 monks in residence.
Wow.
And it's from here that we edit Hinduism Today magazine. The writers are all over the world. The material comes here. We edit it, send it off to the mainland to have printed, and then mail it out around the world and distribute the digital editions.
So besides the magazine, what are some other activities here or somewhere else, anywhere else in the world?
Well, we related, of course, are the various publications. We produce books, websites, mobile apps, all the modern type of digital information comes out on Hinduism.
Right.
As well as we have a temple here. We've had a temple here, Shiva temple, since 1973. a small one, and we're building one that's made out of granite, hand-carved granite on the back part of our acreage.
Right, good.
In terms of activities elsewhere, at this time we have activities on the island of Mauritius. We have a center there in the Indian Ocean,
Wow.
which also has a large Ganesha shrine and activities. So it's called a spiritual park. The idea is it's a place where people come, it's very quiet, they come and worship and meditate and enjoy serenity. In lots of places, Hindu temples are next to the freeway or the bus station.
Right.
So this is a very quiet place, very serene and contemplative in Mauritius, as well as our place here is too.
Right. So, Swamiji, is there a historical link with Sri Lanka? I mean, did this organization start in Sri Lanka in some way?
Yes.
Okay.
It started in Sri Lanka in that Savaya Subramanya Swami went there before he became a Swami when he was 22 years old. That was way back in 1949. He had family friends there, and they helped him meet the mystics of the island. And eventually he went up to the northern part, the Jaffna part, and was totally introduced to the Saivite tradition there and met his guru, Yogaswami, a great mystic, and was initiated, and shortly thereafter came back to the United States and gradually brought the entire tradition that he learned there to life in North America, which is what you find here at our monastery. Same tradition as in northern Sri Lanka, Saivite tradition.
And what's that lineage called, the particular parampara that he was introduced into?
The parampara is the Kailasa parampara.
Okay, that's very interesting, very interesting. So Swamiji, I wanted to have a conversation back and forth with you on a phenomenon in the Western world, especially United States, which has become a big fashion. People are calling themselves spiritual but not religious. This is an area of my study, part of something I'm studying called the UTurn Theory. The UTurn Theory, just for those who aren't familiar, I will summarize. It's a typical journey of many Westerners who abandon, leave, reject their Judaic or Christian tradition, go to India either physically to become a Hindu or not go to India physically but adopt Hindu-like things while remaining in the United States. Either they have a guru or an ashram in India or one in the United States or somewhere in the West. And they start becoming more and more like a Hindu. Some of them get initiated, they have a Hindu name, and then that I call that stage one. Then stage two is a sort of a withdrawal from the official formal Hindu identity into, they continue practicing similar things. They'll do yoga, they may do kirtan, they may do bhajans, they may do meditations. They still may have respect for their guru, but they no longer want to be formally associated with the branding of being Hindu or Hinduism, may or may not be officially linked with the guru anymore. They may become more kind of informal. And there are many reasons I found for moving from stage one to what I call stage two, which is sort of decontextualizing, taking it out of, removing the Hindu context, but continuing some of the practices. And there can be many reasons. For example, they may run into atrocity literature. People telling them that this tradition is bad, it's got caste and they're burning women and all those things. And this whole human rights attack on Hinduism, one of its consequences is that those Westerners who are not fully grounded, they can be dislodged and they can go into stage two. Another reason can be that the Hindu guru never accepted them as a Hindu. And this is a problem and I want to discuss with you later because your organization officially converts people, which I think is very good. But there are a lot of gurus who say, I can't convert you, you can learn all these things and you can continue being Christian or Jewish. So the person is in no man's land. He doesn't have an identity. He doesn't feel that he belongs. Nobody takes responsibility to give him a sense of community, and he's sort of a one man wandering around on his own. And this is not necessarily very stable for a large number of people. So there are all kind of reasons which are described in my UTurn theory. I won't go into details. So then from stage two, some people come back to stage three, which is they return to Judaism or Christianity, or they take this knowledge and return to secular science. You know, so they say, okay, I'm not religious anymore, but this is meditation, it's neuroscience, it's cognitive science, something like that. It's health, it's healing. It's got nothing to do with any religion. So they go into this stage 3 mode, which I call the return. And the return may not be exactly to the same tradition from which they left. It may be to something a little bit different. It's like the spacecraft takes off from Cape Kennedy and it comes back into Arizona or New Mexico or somewhere else. So the person's return is not exactly where he launched from.
Necessarily,
sometimes. That is sort of stage 3. And then some people go into stage 4, which is they start accusing the Hindu tradition. They want to rationalize why they're doing this, and they say, well, I'm doing it because you're no good, you fooled me, the guru was a crook, this tradition is a fraud, and you know, all of that. They fall into the missionary propaganda, all the Hindu phobia. Hindu phobia comes in very handy at that time, because now they can say, look, these are traditions I can also find in these practices I find in Jesus Christ, or I found in Kabbalah, or something like that. And there's a whole market of Westerners who are supplying to these people that, you know, you don't have to be a Hindu anymore. We have yoga, and we have all these kind of things in our own tradition. So that whole digestion industry has this kind of a role of you know, getting people out of Hinduism by saying we've already got it in our own Judeo-Christian tradition. So that's the stage 4 is accusing the Hindu source or the Buddhist source.
Yes, that's interesting.
A kind of it's almost like you know, the person who's somebody who's going to you know, rob a bank or rob some you know, do some burglary, may decide that he'll burn it down. Then he can burn it down, he'll hate it. On the one hand, he's taking all the jewels, all the gems, all the assets. On the other hand, he's full of hatred and wants to burn it down, maybe to hide the evidence, maybe to remove his guilt. He can come up with enough hatred to justify his actions. So this business of stage 4 can be violent, because in stage 4 the person is running away with a lot of the loot, a lot of the good stuff, but he's also accusing that. It's almost that way. Then there is also possibility of a stage 5. Some of these westernized views of Hinduism, both the denigration aspect and the digestion aspect, they get exported back to India. So there's a lot of people in India who are into this kind of spiritual but not religious, these kind of fashions, because it's a Western fashion. So Indians think that one way they can modernize is to kind of participate in these things without saying it's our heritage, because they have an inferiority complex. So instead of saying I'm doing what my grandparents and my forefathers used to do, they can say I am doing this because, you know, Britney Spears is practicing these things, so I'm learning it I'm kind of becoming a you know, Westerner. I'm westernizing. So that's the stage 5, when the Indian people delude themselves thinking that what they are getting is actually some made in USA, when actually it's of Indian origin. So that's my U-turn theory. And so while studying the U-turn theory, I came across this people who are calling themselves spiritual but not religious. So I started studying them, investigating them, and I found that most of what they're doing is Hindu, but they don't want to call it that. They don't want to be called, they don't want to call themselves Jews or Christians, because that's religion they rejected, but they don't want to go all the way and say we are Hindu. They want to take all those practices and call it spiritual but not religious. So that's in a nutshell my experience, but I feel that you would have a lot to share because you must be coming across this all the time. So tell me, what is your perspective on spiritual but not religious?
Well, the way you describe it, I think, fits a certain portion of those who are spiritual but not religious, but doesn't describe all of them.
Okay.
We had an article on this phenomena in our July magazine. Lauren Valentino, an academic, did research on it, and she found that it's a portion of those that are spiritual but not religious that actually have turned to Hinduism. Many of them have turned to other practices as well. So they're not all Hindu oriented. But the Hindu ones, I think you've described them quite accurately. However, there are also Hindus who are now describing themselves as spiritual but not religious.
Right.
And she found some when she did a survey at Duke University. She found 3/4 of the undergraduate Hindu students she interviewed described themselves as spiritual but not religious.
Right.
So that's something that is a little different in that they're taking the idea but applying it in a different way. They're not totally rejecting Hinduism, they're more rejecting the formality of Hinduism, which is generally temple attendance. They won't go to the temple, Hindus who describe themselves as spiritual but not religious. Some of them will worship in their own room. I know a couple who have murtis of Lord Ganesha they're willing to worship in their room, but they won't worship in public and they won't go to a temple.
So at this point,
yes,
can I give my
please.
perspective on this? So I call these
Yes.
stage 5 because what has happened is the brand name, the identity of being spiritual but not religious alleviates the burden of carrying Hinduism on their shoulders, because Hinduism is a
Yes.
sort of a stigma. It has got it is primitive. It's got all these deities, weird practices. Why are you doing all this? It is superstitious. Villagers do it. National Geographic and people like that make fun of it. It's exotic. So this guy is a modern kid from Duke University and he doesn't want anything to do with this. So, but the fact that he privately does it shows that it is more a rejection of public identity than a rejection of actual tenets and practices. And so the temple is the place which is more in the face Hindu,
Yes.
because you have so many deities. And so, if you got rid of the deities, but you have a kind of an abstract philosophy, Bhagavad Gita is okay, Upanishads are okay, yoga is okay, meditation is okay, all that's okay. Even vegetarianism and vegan is cool. So all those things are okay. And the person does not want the burden and the stigmas and the inferiority complexes that go with the in-the-face Hindu symbolism. So I would call that stage 5 because it's really what the West has done and characterized that these people have assimilated and accepted. So it's kind of a colonization. They're colonized by the Western perspective of who they are, and they've allowed that perspective to work on them in such a way that they reject parts of things which the West would not accept. I'll predict, if tomorrow there were a president of the United States and a Congress and a Senate where they put up Ganesh and Shiva and all these murtis and they said we are Hindu, you can bet all these kids at Duke University will line up and call themselves Hindu. It's more of a following the bandwagon of what is politically correct and acceptable and socially acceptable. So that's how I would see that. Would you agree with that?
Well, absolutely, yes. As you say, it has to do with the public image that they want to be perceived as, and they're unwilling for it to be totally Hindu.
Now, one thing you mentioned, I want you to elaborate, please. You mentioned that some of the people who are spiritual but not religious are actually quasi-Hindus. They are Hindus in substance but not in identity and formality. But then you said there are many who are not Hindu based but they are some other tradition based. Could you elaborate, like if somebody is not anybody in any way related to Hinduism, let's say he's Jewish, he may be using the Kabbalah, or somebody who's from Christianity. Tell us more about the Jews and Christians who haven't had the Hindu experience but want to call themselves spiritual but not religious.
Well, I think the easiest group for me to identify, which I've met some of, are Catholics.
Okay.
In other words, talk about image problems. The Catholic Church has a serious image problem in the minds of many people. It's had lots of problems in recent years and lost respect in many communities. Therefore, I know of people who are Catholics, but they're Catholics in their heart, but they won't ever go to Catholic Church, and they won't ever interrelate with Catholic priests because they've lost total respect for the institution, but in their hearts they're still a practicing Catholic. That's a very solid example of what exists in many parts of the world. In terms of Judaism, I haven't met any Jews recently in that situation, but I can reflect back on past experience to try and generalize. I think that there is a clinging to being Jewish. Judaism is a very strong identity. It's a very small group of people trying very hard to not shrink further, and therefore there's a very strong identity and a very strong effort when there's marriage that takes place to bring if the Jew marries a non-Jew, to bring the non-Jew into Judaism, so Judaism doesn't shrink. So there's a strong tie to Judaism, but it's one that would encompass, as you mentioned, practices such as yoga and meditation without really getting into the Murti concept in Hinduism, the reincarnation concept of Hinduism. They wouldn't necessarily touch that. It would be more just in the practices such as yoga and meditation, I would say, but with a strong Jewish identity.
So, Swamiji, in my U-turn model, I would classify these people as stage 3. Stage 3 is
Yes.
where Hindu things have been taken out of context, out of the Hindu context, and put into the
Yes.
Jewish context or Christian context. And I
Yes,
find
that's
I
right.
find among Christians, Catholics doing this, Protestants not doing it as much. In fact, many Protestants churches have a policy anti-yoga, whereas Catholics have a
Yes.
policy saying that Jesus is the yogi, it all came from Jesus and all that. So the Catholics are more prone to digest. The Protestants are more prone to reject
Yes.
some of these Hindu ideas. Protestants are more into rejecting meditation as something dangerous. The silence is something, the workshop of the devil. The devil may creep in, and they'll quote all kinds of things from their texts to show that you should keep contemplation is contemplation about Jesus. Contemplation is not silence. So
That's very good.
it is nama roop. When they translate that into contemplation, it's a wrong word. It's a mistranslation for us, because for them what it means is you're contemplating on Jesus, and so you're full of content. You're filling yourself with nama roop rather than emptying yourself from nama roop. So there is that kind of a tendency. Now, a lot of my work on digestion, where Hindu ideas are reformulated into something else. Either it could be secular science, or it could be Judaism, or it could be Christianity. When I look at the Christian examples, they're invariably Catholic. And I have a whole history, and maybe we can develop this together or something like that. I'm writing a whole book on how Hinduism has changed Catholicism in the last 100 years. I mean, there are people like Father Bede Griffiths, experience of him. He went to India, started a thing called an ashram, and he wrote this. He wrote so much on Christian Vedanta, and he criticized Christianity and said Hinduism is the future. Then he tried to make a hybrid, and then Ramon Panikkar, the Sri Lankan Catholic, he played a very important role. Now there are people like Russell Paul, a young man somewhere in Texas or somewhere in the southwest of the United States. He calls himself a successor of Bede Griffiths. He's carrying this out. And then I interviewed recently Dr. Ravi Ravindra, who's a Hindu also, but he works for Templeton Foundation. He wrote this Christ the Yogi. He's trying to bring as much Hinduism into Christianity, with not calling it Hindu anymore, calling it spiritual but not religious. So spiritual but not religious has become a kind of decontextualized Hinduism that can be brought into Judaism and retrofitted under Kabbalah sometimes brought into Catholicism, and then the person can say, I know nothing about Hinduism. I don't have a guru. I never went to a temple. I am disconnected. I have no knowledge of Hinduism. All I know is Christianity, and I don't want to be religious, but I want to be spiritual. So I think this spiritual but not religious, instances which are not Hindu but instances which are Jewish or Christian, if you look at it, the person is consuming something produced by someone else who was in fact a Hindu. So it's one stage removed.
One stage removed, yes.
Yes.
I agree. It's one stage removed. But the difference to me is if you were to talk to that person about Hinduism, try to take them deeper into it, they wouldn't go.
They wouldn't
Whereas if you talk to the other group
Yes.
that we talked about first, they'd be interested in going deeper into Hinduism.
Yes, yes. So there is the person who is the first generation experiencer of Hinduism, who then comes out, decontextualizes, and creates a kind of an export variety for his clientele who are Christians. He's an ex-Hindu who has now become stage 2 or stage 3, and he's writing books, and he's creating this Christian yoga. He's doing all of these things, and he's come up with John of the Cross developed meditation, and all of these kind of very fancy. He looks for old texts with some shred of similarity, so that he can say, well, it all came from there. So he's rehabilitating Hinduism, or recontextualizing, reformulating it in a Christian kind of package, because his clientele want to say that they are Christians, and what he's selling to them, the buyers of this are the ones in that other category who are not Hindu, who don't want anything to do with Hinduism. They are in fact allergic to Hinduism. They want to be Christians, but they don't want to be religious Christians. They want to be spiritual Christians.
Yes,
I think it's important to understand. I would like to talk to the professor who wrote that article, but I would say that almost every single person I've come across who denies Hinduism, who denies he knows anything about Hinduism, who says I'm a Christian but I'm spiritual and I'm doing all this meditation and yoga and this vegetarianism and veganism and all these kind of things, or who says I'm a Jewish person and I'm doing all these things and I want nothing to do with Hinduism and I don't know anything to do with Hinduism, those spiritual but not religious examples are people who are the consumers of this kind of a product, which has been marketed to them, supplied to them by producers who are the ones who are first generation U-turners.
I see. Yes, that's a good point.
Do you agree with that? I mean, I have a lot of examples of this. I mean, I have examples like, for instance,
I agree. Yes.
Yeah. For instance, in the U.S., there is a Father B. Griffiths movement, and they're practicing his teachings and his meditation in several dozen ashrams and churches. Now, Father B. Griffith was one kind of person in terms of his relationship with Hinduism, because he was so deeply immersed, he couldn't deny he got all these ideas from there, and he was reformulating them for a different audience. But these people, tens of thousands of them in the United States particularly, they can say, we don't know anything about Hinduism. We just got it from Father Bede, or we got it from some other teacher, and we don't know anything about it. So I think there is a middleman who serves as a sort of a person who can change it's sort of like money laundering, where money becomes clean, it's given a new identity, it's given a new ownership. This is some kind of a laundering of cultural assets, because the man in the middle takes something which is clearly Hindu, repackages it, comes up with a whole different way of looking at it, and his consumers don't have to know that it's Hindu. His value added is that he can give it to them in a way that the origins and sources are totally disguised.
Yes, that's a good summary of it. Very good summary.
So Swamiji, if we agree with this, now I'm out of my elements in terms of what to do. What do you do about it? What are the harms it's causing, and what should we do about it?
Yes, well, I think we need to identify the trends and then see if we can change the trends. And there's two trends that I gave thought to already, and maybe we'll discover more in this discussion. One is the trend that's pointed out in the article we did, that individuals who are spiritual but not religious, doing the Hindu practices and not tied to Abrahamic religions, would be open to learning more about Hinduism and going more deeply into Hinduism, but no one is presenting it to them. And as the article pointed out, much to my surprise, most of these individuals don't know that what they're believing and practicing is Hindu, or she also calls it dharmic. It is held by the other religions from India as well. they don't know it, and there's no one that they're encountering, no one who has repackaged it, so to speak, will take them that next step into Hinduism. So how to expose these individuals to Hinduism is the question. And are there teachers out there, teachers of yoga and meditation, that are willing to speak more about Hinduism and bring these individuals deeper into it? Because they are in that situation of not having a religion. In this case, they didn't leave one recently. If they left one, it was probably some time ago. The other trend is more directly influencing Hinduism, and it has to do with the second generation USA Hindus who have decided not to go to the temple. And they're very strong in this belief, and it's not going to be changed very easily if they're in their 20s. Time to change it is earlier. It's going to mean in instances of temples where there's not a new influx of first generation US Hindus, the attendance is going to shrink. And I've already seen that in a few temples that are fairly isolated from major growing Hindu communities. The attendance of the temple is shrinking, and the children of the founders of the temple definitely don't go to the temple. So the temple is going to be in a situation where the attendance drops.
Right.
So those are the two situations, and I kind of mentioned a solution to the first one already, which is if we can get some of these teachers of yoga and meditation to talk more about the depth of Hinduism to those who are spiritual but not religious, who want to learn about it, then that would be very helpful. In the case of Hindus who become spiritual but not religious, I think there's a chance during their teenage years to focus on what they can be taught. They're not necessarily being taught the right thing. They're not being prepared to go off to the university to be exposed to the variety of beliefs that you studied, so deeply in your UTurn theory. They're going to be exposed to all of that, and it's going to change their perspective of Hinduism. So the opportunity is beforehand with teachers and with parents to talk about the issues that will come up, the difference between spirituality and religion, the bad image that Hinduism has that you've referred to. These are points that teachers can talk about to Hindu teenagers, and I think the most effective teachers would be those who are second generation US Hindus themselves and a bit older. They can be, they've grown up here and they have the same understandings that someone who grew up in India wouldn't be able to relate to. Growing up in the US is very different than growing up in India, places where other Hindu communities are tight. So good teaching is definitely something that is needed, and we need to alert the parents too, so that they can try and prepare their children for the university experience so that they don't end up rejecting a lot of Hinduism simply because the people they encounter at the university have those ideas.
Yes. So Swamiji, this is a very, just to sort of recap and give you some of my views along the same lines. If we take this one by one, what you've said is there's a group who were not Hindu origin, and they are spiritual but not religious. So the method for them is to teach them more about Hinduism. They're already doing some Hindu things, but they're not wanting to call it Hinduism. At the same time, they do not feel comfortable to say that they're Christian or Jews. They're just spiritual people. Now, in that case, it's a multi-pronged, approach. You also have to counter the negative propaganda that Hinduism keeps getting, because as long as they keep seeing all this stuff, church propaganda and all this mass media propaganda, school textbooks, where they're exoticizing and kind of persecuting Hinduism, making it look like a weird thing, the person is less likely to be associated with some identity of that sort. So I think a large part of bringing them into the Hindu fold has to do with cleaning up the brand value and the identity of what it means to be a Hindu. And this is a huge fight. I mean, you are involved in it and I'm involved in it. A lot of us are involved in it, trying to fix this kind of distortions. Then there is this question of teachers who understand why such a clientele would like an identity, and you are helping them, giving them an identity. You see, some of these people who've escaped from Christianity or escaped from Judaism, or if that's a word I can use, they are leaving a autocratic, dictatorial, very tough system, very formal, full of too many demands, and therefore they've rejected all religiosity, because to them that's it's sort of fanatical, it's not open to rationality, it's not open to inquiry, and they need to be told that by adopting a Hindu kind of a package, they are not going to be subject to the same kind of extra, too much rigor and discipline in that sense. It's an open architecture, as I call it. I use the term open architecture, and there's openness to inquiry, a lot of flexibility. You can have an Ishta Devata. This may be different from someone else's Ishta Devata. There is so many choices you can make within the Hindu architecture. So I think explaining Hinduism for the 21st century, for the spiritual but not religious kind of group, requires special people who really understand all this stuff and who have to have done the Purva Paksha of such people to understand them, to know why they are like that. So I think you're right. This is a big challenge, but if we could crack that, there's tens of millions of people like that. And so
absolutely, yes.
And then the other group you mentioned, who are Indian origin, hence the parents are Hindu, they've come to this country. I mean, their problems are different in the sense that parents were usually very busy making money, establishing themselves financially, materially, quite successfully actually, the community has done. So the kids have not been raised with a sense of identity, and the parents had to go to the office and not wear a bindi, not wear symbols because it would be weird. It's not worth your while to try and justify and explain all this, because it's easier to say, okay, I don't believe in all that, I'm spiritual, and so none of this matters, it's all the same. It's one less problem to deal with. I'm working hard enough to climb up and get promotions and make more money, and I don't want to be compromised because I have these things that people don't understand about me. It's one less liability. So it's better for me to just practice in my home and not even bother projecting. So I think parents who worked very hard went through that. And so this influenced the kids. And the kids didn't learn how to assert their identity. They didn't learn how to answer embarrassing questions. So I think that's a whole different challenge that needs to be met. But what we are discussing is very important. The Hindu encounter with spiritual but not religious is something Hindus are not taking seriously. They're only worrying about evangelists, Christian evangelists and hard, tough Muslim invaders. But they're not. I think that far more dangerous is this business of people who want to just digest Hinduism into a non-entity, dissolve it, take away parts, take away the yoga, take away the dance, take away this, that, and then there is nothing left. There is no Hinduism left. All the useful things have been taken over. So this threat of being digested is actually a very dangerous one.
Yes, I have an example on that. I call that if you have a crown with the beautiful gems in it, and that's Hinduism in its original form, and then one of the gems is Ayurveda, you take that one away. Another gem is yoga, you take that away. Another one is belief in karma, you take that away. You end up with just a piece of metal. So that's an easy way to visualize what you're talking about.
Right.
When you take all this out of Hinduism, what's left?
Yes.
Not much.
It's not only some regular metal, but the caste cow's curry liability. What's left is caste system. You see, there is a concerted strategy to pluck out the jewels from this, and then to keep accusing what's left, what the West does not want, as horrible stuff, bad stuff, and that's really the foundation of Hinduism, that's the premise, that's the whole thing, so that people are alienated from it.
Agreed. Caste is one of the largest problems in the educational presentation of Hinduism.
I'm developing a construct, I need your help. Certain aspects of the crown cannot just be plucked and digested because the Judeo-Christian, if they were to adopt that particular jewel, it will refute and defeat their own premise. So I call it poison pill. If you swallow that, then you get poisoned. It's indigestible. It'll give you indigestion. So an example would be if you tell people that for some of the gems to work, some of the jewels in the crown to work, you have to take them as a package. And in the package will be karma and reincarnation, for example.
Yes.
Okay. And then that's a poison pill because they cannot accept it in Judeo-Christianity. Or if you could say that, Tantra, and then the way Tantra works, it does something for your own enlightenment, for your own body. It affects your sense of self in such a way that you just don't want to be subject to Christianity anymore because you just don't buy that fallen sinner and all that kind of stuff. So I'm working with ideas that I would say I've called them poison pills, and I'm looking for nuggets. I'm looking for gems in the crown, to use your metaphor, such that they're not digestible into Judeo-Christianity, and the challenge is to make sure that they are part of the package that's appropriated, and they are not part of the metal that's left behind.
Yes,
that's the thing. Right now, actually, what they'll do is anything that seems like a poison pill, like deities. Deities are a poison pill. I mean, if you imagine if you put a Shiva inside a church, or God forbid if you put a Kali inside a church, I mean, that's a real poison pill for them. So but they can avoid that by saying that this is idol worship and we are told not to have idols and all that stuff. So some of the potential poison pills they have guarded against because their doctrine says so. And some of the poison pills that we may bring to them, they may not be wary of, they may not be alert, they may not have thought about that how this can be a poison pill. So I think if we were to teach as part of our teachings those things which when practiced will alleviate the person from all these old fixations they have, make them a freer person, that could be a way also of propagating.
One basic one that comes to mind is just the idea that man is a divine being.
Right.
Because I've participated in interfaith gatherings with Christian ministers and talked about the nature of man, and my answer, of course, was just the traditional Vedanta point of view that man is divine.
Right.
Man is a divine being. And they had to counter by saying man is a fallen being,
right,
who is totally lost unless he is redeemed.
Right.
Oh, no, very different.
That's a very important
idea.
Thing because original sinner versus originally divine.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. So I call it, there's this Christian good news that Jesus has come to save you from your sins.
Yes.
And I have been going around saying Hindu good news is that I'm originally divine. I'm not an original sinner to begin with. So I don't have the problem that requires being redeemed. I think that's a very important poison pill. Philosophical poison pill, metaphysical poison pill.
Agreed.
So Swamiji, is where do you think Christianity is headed in the Western world? I mean, in India it's growing like crazy, but what is happening to Christianity in the West, do you think?
Well, Christianity has many forms in the West, and for simplicity, if we just look at the major denominations and not the minor ones, it's easier to generalize. I think that the impact of spiritual but not religious is going to have a strong effect in reducing the size of the congregations. It's already been happening for decades in Europe, where they've had to end up selling churches because they just don't have enough people coming anymore. But the idea that 62% of the youth in the United States believe themselves to be spiritual but not religious means they're not going to go to these churches and synagogues to worship. So it's going to impact the institutional size of these denominations. And then I think is going to create groups that are spin-offs of Christianity, as you were describing, and there'll probably be more demand for that. I believe it's the third group of the
yes.
U-turns.
Yes.
There's going to be more demand for the third group teachers.
Yes.
For these
Absolutely.
spiritual but not religious
Absolutely.
people. So that area is going to thrive, I think.
And that is why there's a huge demand, huge market potential for somebody to U-turn.
Yes.
You know, so I mean, what I want to ask is, how do you secure the monks in your monastery very successfully? Are there cases where they U-turn? How do you keep them from U-turning? How do you make it a lifelong transformation for them, and not something which is sort of a temporary one?
Well, it's not just the monks; it's our devotees as well.
Right.
We have, as you referenced earlier, we have a process where you can actually convert to Hinduism that we've been using for many decades, and one of the keys to avoid U-turn is for an individual who wants to become a Hindu, who wasn't born a Hindu, but is related to a tradition in Christianity or Judaism, to actually leave that tradition in a formal way.
Very good idea.
And there has to be a true severance, and not just a severance in the person's mind. We require that they go, and ideally they go to the place where they're considered a member, talk to the priest or rabbi there, and explain that they're going to leave that religion and become a Hindu through receiving namakarana samskara. That's how we do it. And in so doing, they have a mental severance takes place in their mind, as well as the institution lets go of them, and they may even, as in the case of the Catholic Church, it's called ipso facto conversion. If you join another religion, you're excommunicated automatically from Catholicism. That's what happens if you become a Hindu. So you're no longer a Catholic.
Right.
So these are practices that our guru figured out many decades ago to minimize this U-turn process.
Right, right.
Clearly break with the tradition you're part of. And then he also asked that to have a legal name change to a Hindu name, and they not carry their Christian or Judaic name forward. So they have a Hindu name, which can cause quite upset with the family. But all of that is necessary if you're going to fully become a Hindu and therefore minimize this possibility of U-turn.
Right.
Intellectual study is also something we believe in, that you need to, it can't be an emotional decision or a partially thought through decision, which is what could happen if you just, go to an ashram in India for a year and then come back. You haven't necessarily acquired the intellectual understandings of what Hinduism is and how it relates to your previous religion and how it's different and why you're really a Hindu and no longer believe like you previously did. So a clear intellectual comparison of the two traditions, which can take a few years, is also a good foundation to minimize this U-turn.
Mm-hmm. I think these are very important things that you just said, because one of the things I found causing U-turns when Westerners come is that the Hindu gurus don't know how to convert them. So they keep dancing around this. They're scared of converting. They are insecure. They haven't studied Christianity enough. They themselves are somewhat compromised. They keep talking about all religions are the same. They really don't understand the different tenets. So they are trying to kind of take the easy way out and saying, okay, I'll teach you pranayama and you can just breathe better and you will get the light and all that, but it doesn't have anything to do with what you call yourself. Some of them are doing some very outright illogical things, like just because gravitation is not Christian, even though Newton discovered it, the same way there is nothing Hindu in any of these practices. I mean, they just don't get the point that it is not the name Hinduism that matters, but certain practices are work with certain environmental conditions, certain processes, certain agamas, certain shaktis are needed in order for the result to come, and certain other environmental conditions are contraindicated. So yes. Hinduism is these set of these set of contexts and conditions in which you live. It's not the naming of it. You could call it something else. It's not not a debate about a name, but a debate about an ecosystem. So you need a certain ecosystem in which a certain plant or a certain thing has to thrive, and you cannot put it in a hostile ecosystem and expect it to grow. So I think our own gurus have this problem of not properly understanding that for their teachings to go beyond a trivial level, they are better off securing the person with a sense of identity, stability, camaraderie, community, all of that by actually pronouncing them a member of this group. Our own teachers, our own gurus are at fault.
Well, they haven't had the opportunity necessarily to see the other environments that people can be in, other ecosystems at work, and how different they are from Hinduism. If you just have the experience of India and you're a Hindu, what you experience is Hindu.
Right.
You don't get into other ecosystems. But if you're in the U.S., then the majority of ecosystems are not Hindu, and you have a better sense of what they are and how they're different and how they're not conducive, as you say, to the effectiveness of Hindu practices.
Right. I think one of the big harms to Hinduism has been this Hindu belief of many leaders that you cannot convert to become a Hindu. Mm-hmm. And then there are others who say, well, maybe you can, but you don't need to. It's a way of life.
Yes.
When they say Hinduism is defined as a way of life, the drug culture is also a way of life, and Taliban is a way of life, and cats have a cat way of life, and horses have a horse way of life, and dogs have a dog way of life. So just saying it's a way of life doesn't tell you what particular way of life. I mean, a way of life is not specific enough. So it has to be a specific way of life. And when you define what is specific about it, what is distinct about it, that's when you're beginning to define what it is. So just a generic, it's a way of life, is like saying, I define paper as a collection of molecules, but so is everything else. So it's not specific. I think our own people have shied away from specificity in the name of flexibility and also out of ignorance. So the time has come to start, without compromising the open architecture, flexibility of Hinduism, it's very important to become very clear and concrete on what are some of the tenets that are non-negotiable and what are some of the things you definitely exclude. I mean, there are things like that. So I'm sure, maybe a discussion or a conference on what is Hinduism for the 21st century could be a nice idea, some project we could work on together perhaps.
Yes, that's a very good idea, because these topics that you're bringing up they're just not well understood, and there's a genuine misunderstanding based on lack of exposure. That's the way I would describe it. Right. Is if your experience of Hinduism is simply India and doesn't include Western countries, then it can look quite different than it does from the viewpoint of Western countries.
Right. I think this is a very important point you just made. A lot of people in India are confused between the dharma of Hinduism and Indian ethnicity.
Yes.
And they think that if you dress a certain way and eat certain food and you eat with your hands and you sing, you speak a certain language, I mean, therefore that's what Hindu is. So they're describing Indian ethnicity. And,
Yes.
and this means that they don't feel they have to study Hinduism. They don't really feel they have to understand it, because what's the big deal? I drink my mango lassi and I eat with my hands and I have my idli, and so that's all it takes. This kind of trivializing Hinduism as just an ordinary way of life and ethnicity, and if you're born Indian, then you're automatically, that's all you need to know. All you need is to be born. This sort of trivializes the tapasya needed, the effort needed.
Absolutely. Yes, it leads to lack of practice.
Yes.
The understanding that we need to be practicing something on a regular basis gets overlooked when you approach it that way.
Yes. And I think on the other hand, people who've made a conscious choice and fought obstacles and become a Hindu, converted to a Hinduism, had to fight all their friends and family, peers, pulling them in the other direction, and not taken the U-turn after decades. That's quite remarkable, and their level of understanding and clarity has to be appreciated. So we definitely need non-Indian Hindus. We need them very badly. We need them as part of our home team of intellectual Kshatriyas.
Yes, diversity,
Yes.
definite diversity.
And also they understand the fighting, because they have been part of that other side. They understand how the other side operates. So in order to deal with the other side, they are very good resources.
Yes, and they understand concepts such as why all religions aren't the same.
Right.
It's a ridiculous statement when you have a certain background. And one thing you can be sure of, if someone says all religions are the same, one thing immediately, they're a Hindu. Only Hindus make that kind of statement.
Right. Well, Swamiji, I'm very delighted we had this conversation. I hope we'll have many more. I would love to, find different ways that my Infinity Foundation and your Himalayan Academy can work together for these causes, because there's so much work to do. And you have a remarkable institution with lots to its credit. I'm an admirer. I appreciate it. And I thank you for your time. We'll keep in touch.
Well, thank you, Rajiv. It's been a pleasure to engage in this dialogue with you.
Thank you so much, Swamiji. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. To help me, you can go to the subscribe button on my YouTube and subscribe. We need more subscribers there. Secondly, I get lots of emails on people saying, how do we donate? How can we help you? You go to rajivmalhotra.com or you go to infinityfoundation.com and you can hit the donate button. If you're in a foreign country like in the US or somewhere, you can donate in dollars. There are different ways mentioned. If you want to donate in rupees, there is a column called Infinity Foundation India, and you click that and there are instructions on how you can donate in India.